Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading some true Let's Not Meet horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. But before we get into the stories, I do want to make an announcement. I have started a Patreon for this channel. If you would like to join the Patreon, the link will be in the description down below. I want to let y'all know, though, that on Patreon, I'm not going to be doing exactly the same thing as I do here on this channel. Don't worry, Patreon will still be some true stories and things of that nature, but it's going to be stories that are a little too much for YouTube. Either the stories are too graphic in content for YouTube and therefore I can't post them here, so I have to post them there. Or I'll also be reading some fictional, more NSFW sexy type stories as well. The first book that I'm going to be reading, for example, is Haunting Adeline. So that might give you an idea of the type of content that'll be over on Patreon. But anyways, I hope it's something that some of you may be interested in. If it does sound interesting to you, again, go to the link down below in the description and check it out. There is a free preview of some of the stuff that I'm going to be doing on there, so you can check that out before you decide to pay to subscribe. But anyways, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. I only remember bits and pieces of this story, but my mom and husband filled me in. This happened in 2018. My parents, my husband, and I were driving to Indianapolis to see some family. I'd found out about my husband's 4-month emotional affair with his unstable ex, and I was really struggling and I felt extremely alone. His ex had tried to break us up, and I was afraid that she'd succeed because of how manipulative she is. I lied and told my husband that I was having a cigarette, while actually I went to the bar. I ordered 2 double vodkas with a splash of orange juice. I was really connecting to the bartender when she said that they were closing. She gave me another bar that was close by. I was already feeling relaxed when I got to TGI Fridays. I ordered 2 more double vodkas and I was wasted, so I went outside to have a cigarette to wake me up. I was leaning against a light pole in the parking lot. Time passed and I suddenly realized that I was being walked and pushed into a car. Suddenly I heard my mom yelling to stop, that I was her daughter. This creepy man was challenging her on whether we were related. It was insane, and I don't remember much, but I do remember him trying to steal me. This guy would not give up and was basically holding me hostage. That's when my mom said that she'd call the police. He drove away so fast that his passenger door was open. My mother and husband told me later that they tracked my phone and came to see where I was. I had my phone in my purse, so I don't know if the guy got rid of it or what, but it's really scary. They found my phone discarded. Then my mom called 911 because I was extremely drunk and I wasn't making sense. I woke up in the hospital. I was tied down because apparently for my safety. When I actually woke up, I had huge bruises on my arm from the guy trying to get me in his car, and also an incredibly huge bruise on my chest. I didn't know what happened, but I felt guilty and never really understood what happened. Update: my husband and I worked it out, by the way, and we're good now. I was a child between 5 and 10 years old. I remember bits and pieces of this story, but some of it is what I recall my mother telling me years ago. My mom had a friend we grew up with, Donna. Donna and her daughter came over to hang out with my sister and I numerous times, having sleepovers and the like. One time, Donna was fighting with her boyfriend, and I guess had fled to our house during the breakup. Or maybe she was already over when her ex freaked out. Either way, I remember being hurried into my sister's room by Donna, along with my sister and Donna's daughter. Donna flipped my sister's full-size bed on its side and had us lay down against the wall with the mattress and box frame leaning against the wall above us. Then moved the dresser to the door. I closed my eyes and covered my ears because I was still afraid of the dark and my sister kept crying. This is the last I remember of the night. My mother told me that apparently Donna barricaded us in my sister's room because her ex, Fred, showed up unexpectedly looking for her. My mother went to defuse the situation and explained that Donna wasn't there. We hadn't heard from her. Go somewhere else. Fred went to his car and came out with some sort of shotgun, while my mom fled back inside, locking the door. Fred let one shot go as she went in the door, peppering my mom's back with pellets and the front of our house. I guess very shortly thereafter, the police arrived and subdued Fred without a fight. I'm not sure how long it took, or what happened between her being shot and the police showing up, but I know we lived right down the block from the police station, and my mom had called when she saw Fred get there before she ever confronted him. My mom's boyfriend, who worked nights, rushed home and was checking on my sister, and I, as my father, my parents were split co-parenting, shows up. Apparently, my mom didn't go to properly explain what happened in a phone call with my dad, so all he got from it was boyfriend shooting near kids and came over. My dad punched my mom's boyfriend in the face, putting him out cold, before being told that he wasn't the shooter. My dad and her boyfriend had never had issues prior, and didn't after when my dad found out that her boyfriend left work and rushed over to check on us first. But yeah, my mom told me the truth about that night about a year before she passed away. She died with pellets still in her neck and back from that night that caused chronic pain, but for reasons beyond my understanding were not treatable. To Fred, stay the heck away from my family. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was 14 or 15 years old. At the time, I was making pocket money by mowing the lawn at my mom's condominium. The lawnmower was kept in a small storage building where only I and the landlord had the keys. Some backstory about this building. It didn't have any windows and only one door. It consisted of only one room where the lawnmower and other gardening stuff were kept. The building's inner and outer roof had a small piece in between them. I wouldn't call it an attic, just a space. The inside roof was made of only spare planks, which meant you could see into said space. Anyways, one Sunday I needed to mow the lawn, so I took the keys and headed to the storage. The door was locked as usual, so I opened it with the keys. I stepped into the storage, and with no particular reason I looked up. My heart dropped. Up there, on those rickety planks, there was a man just looking down. I looked up for only a second or two, and he looked back at me. His clothes were dirty and face covered in scars. I didn't want him to do anything, so I pretended as if I hadn't seen him. I took the lawnmower, walked out the door, and closed it behind me. I immediately ran to our apartment and called the police, who arrived in about 5 minutes. The police went in, and a couple of minutes later they brought out the man in handcuffs. The man had been trying to climb back into the roof while holding a pair of garden shears. Truly horrifying. Who knows what could have happened if I didn't look up while entering the storage. Me and my mom moved out sometime after. So, to the man in the roof, let's never meet again. I work at a retail grocery chain, and in the store there is a liquor department which is sectioned off from the rest of the grocery store. I was working in that department when a man came in. He purchased a few alcohol shots and made conversation with me. Everything was normal until he pulled an axe out of his backpack. I was completely shocked, to be honest. It seems really odd to say, but seeing this very strange man rambling about how nobody would dare mess with him because of his axe. He held it out in the open and kept mentioning how sharp the blade was. He cut his receipt in half on the counter in front of me to demonstrate how sharp the blade was. He was mentioning how it could cut through bone and flesh. I tried to not escalate the situation and didn't really react or say much about the axe. I'm ashamed to say I was sort of frozen and didn't tell him to put it away or leave. I wanted to keep everything calm and get him out as quickly as possible. I let my supervisor know immediately once he left. She pulled me aside and asked me to describe the man. A security officer was able to identify the man on camera. My store manager ended up contacting the police. I gave a police officer my recounting of events, and he informed me. He spoke with the individual outside in the parking lot, and they would be trespassed from the store. It was incredibly unnerving being in that situation, in an isolated area with somebody who seemed to be mentally unstable, holding a huge axe. This happened this Saturday, 2 days ago. I'm a 19-year-old freshman at university who moved from a fairly small town to a big city. There was a guy that I talked to over Tinder for around 2 weeks. He was cute and seemed nice. We had a lot in common. He even studied at the same university. He was older though. He already had a degree and was now doing post-grad. The first time we ever met, we went out to grab a coffee on Monday, exactly a week ago. I had a great time, and when he asked me if I'd like to get drinks, drinking age here is 18, on Saturday, I happily said yes. We met up at a local bar and talked without a moment of awkwardness for 2 hours. We really clicked. I had to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, a man was waiting for me outside the toilet. He stopped me and told me the guy sitting at my table put something in my drink and asked if I wanted him to call the police. I thanked him but said no, everything's fine, and went back to my table. I really liked the guy and wanted to believe that the random man was just pranking me. Still, I wasn't willing to risk it, so I told him directly what happened. I said, "I'm sorry, this sounds insane, but after I got out of the bathroom, some random guy told me that you put something in my drink." He laughed and said that's insane, as if we were giggling at the situation together. He wasn't serious about it at all. I apologized and said I don't think he did that, not at all, but I'd be much more at peace if he chugged my drink, just so I know that random guy was pranking me, because nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I apologized again and said the drinks are on me, and I'm very sorry to make the situation awkward. He said that that's absolutely not a problem, he just has to go pee first. I waited. After 15 minutes, I realized he's not coming back. I waited around for a little bit longer, and after half an hour I paid and went home. Upon getting home, I checked my Tinder and saw that he deleted his account. Okay, maybe he thought I'm so insane that our date made him delete the app. Still, it bothered me. I Googled him and found nothing. Today, I went to the records at my office at my university and asked if a person with his name was studying here. The lady working there told me that that's private information that she can't share. I then asked if a person with his name had ever obtained a degree from the university. She looked it up and told me that no one with his name has ever obtained a degree here. He lied to me. He told me that he did his undergraduate degree at my university, but he hadn't. Or alternatively, he told me a fake name. I'm now sure that he had terrible intentions and did spike my drink. I was more than lucky that someone noticed. I have no idea what he'd do to me had I drank that, and I really don't want to know. I'm still a bit creeped out about the situation. I did delete Tinder, and I'm very glad that I didn't give him my phone number or my address. He did offer to pick me up, and I cleverly said no, yet dumbly told him that the coffee place that we met up at is walking distance to my apartment, so he knows the area that I live in, as well as my first and my last name and where I study. I don't think there's anything I can do about it though. I seriously doubt he even gave me his real name. So to the random Tinder guy who lied to me and probably tried to drug me, let's not meet. And to the kind man who made me aware of the situation, thank you very much. I caught a cab with my 3-year-old son today, going to preschool, but for a coffee at our local first. The cabbie was a greasy-looking 50 to 60-year-old Caucasian male with slicked-back white hair, balding at crown hair, and a beer gut. Not that physical appearances necessarily matter, but perhaps they add context. It was a short drive, as aforementioned, to preschool. 8 minutes, I think. Within the first couple of minutes, he was talking about that hottie Margot Robbie, who I've been compared to looking like before. And then we passed a cop car, and he's like bloody cops. I proceeded to ask if he didn't like cops, and he kinda stumbled over why and pointed out basically how they do their job and set on the radar gun at this specific spot. Methamphetamine was mentioned at one point, but I kind of blanked out on the exact conversation, because all I'm thinking is his vibe is weird. He won't stop talking, and from that first conversation about Margot Robbie being hot, I was gonna be happy for a cab ride to be over. He went to pull up into a car space that was obviously way too small for his big van that he's driving, and I actually had to say, look, I don't want to obstruct traffic, and he kind of angrily muttered something about the trees being in the way, and aggressively pulled out and into a bigger space further up. After I paid, he's unbuckled his seatbelt and got out and said, do you mind if I caffeinate with you? I was legit so shocked at his brazenness. I'm with my son and have places to be, that I kinda just mumbled an okay. He proceeds to follow me into the coffee store. He starts to say something about a nude model on the beach, and luckily the attendant interjects, asking if I'd like to place my order. So I get out of hearing whatever was going to follow on from that statement. I ordered my coffee and head straight down to the back of the store, where they have an enclosed play area for my toddler while I wait for coffee. He orders and follows me down and excuses himself to make some room. Gross. One of the attendants comes down with his coffee and asks if she should put this here. I look at her exasperated, and I said, well, I don't know, he's not with me. And she said, I thought you two were together. I said, no, he's my cab driver and I don't know him. This is weird, isn't it? She looked really confused, confronted, and then concerned, and was amazing, and said, if you need any help, I'll let one of the managers know, and we'll get the owner. So anyway, he comes out while at least 10 minutes later. But very shortly after, the coffee's arrived, and I'm packing my son up to leave to walk to preschool and daycare. It's literally a 2-minute walk away, and mention I'm heading off. He asks if he can give me a ride up to the preschool. No, it's fine, it's a short walk. He tries to insist. I insist. No thank you, it's a nice walk. Then he asks what time I'm coming back. I'm reluctant to give any details by now, so I just say I'm not sure, and he continues to probe as to whether it'll be around an hour, and if so, he'll make a call to his office and see if he could wait for me. In the politest of ways, I say heck no, and I'll be a few hours at least, which really wasn't a lie. I was going to be 3 exactly, but I didn't want him knowing that. I ended up feeling so out of sorts by the behavior that I filed a complaint with a taxi company. My husband went looking for his taxi, being a small town. He was ropeable, but luckily didn't find him. I appreciated his valor, though. I now feel confused about whether my gut feeling on this guy was correct, and kind of scared because he knows where we live, which is on a property with no neighbors close by, and no husband home during the day. Am I overreacting? So I live in a gated subdivision. It isn't really the kind of place that has many issues, far away from where I grew up. I've never been one to shy away from my past. I did 13 years in federal prison for some crimes that I am still trying to atone for. I know what's waiting for me on the other side, and I know where I'm heading, but I'm still trying to make things right in the world and leave something positive for both of my daughters. Lately, we've been the subject of some random acts of vandalism and threatening messages. One was a letter in our mailbox that said murderer. I committed no such atrocity. Nobody was murdered in any of my crimes. Given that we're just getting past the Halloween season, I assumed it was someone just trying to play a scary prank. More or less no harm, no foul. My wife found a letter under her windshield wipers that had a similar message, saying don't let him fool you, which included my mugshot from many, many years ago. A mugshot that even I've had trouble finding, but managed to do so after some sufficient digging. Our garage was also spray painted. A lawn gnome was decapitated, and a series of plastic forks were left in my front yard. My daughters were scared, and that's absolutely where the line gets drawn with me. I know people like to say, but cameras and call the police. The one responsible didn't consider that I worked for a security company, specifically ones that hire ex-cons to save people from people like me. My house has cameras in place you would never think to look, and within a matter of minutes I was able to find a shot of the person responsible. If you're wondering why I didn't do this in the first place, I did. He was just better at hiding his face the first few times. But like all criminals, he slipped up and got too confident. I can relate. I knew where to find him. I didn't call the cops. I went over there myself. I knew his parents. Yes, he's a teenager. I walked over there and told his parents what he did. They didn't believe me, so I happily showed them the printouts of my security footage that had him clear as day on there. I'll give them credit. They stood up for their son, but also acknowledged when he screwed up and called him over. Honestly, the look on his face when he saw me inside of his house was all the confirmation anyone needed. I became very nervous and started shaking. I'm not a monster. I assured him that I wasn't there to hurt anyone and that I wanted to have the matter resolved. He had vandalism, trespassing, damage to private property, and mail tampering to answer to. I asked why he did it. Basically, the answer I got was he and his friends were trying to do some sort of true crime series for what I'm assuming is maybe a YouTube channel or something. His explanation wasn't very excessive. I gave him a choice. The police could be called or he could pay for the damages that he caused. His father asked if he paid for the damages, I would get rid of the footage that I have. I told him no. I assured him if the damages were paid for and stayed away from my family, I wouldn't call the police. But if he didn't or did it again, I would. They agreed. His father asked me again if I would reconsider, but again I refused. This was his second chance. I'm being very merciful and forgiving to those who trespassed against us. I don't know why people feel the need to destroy something that someone is trying to build. In my case, it's stability. We have to start accepting that people are trying to change for the better. Stan, let's not meet. Unless, of course, you're coming to clean up your mess. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. I had him write this to follow the rules and get the best version. I was about 7 to 8 years old, and me, along with my friends, were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing dangerous stuff. We would make smoke bombs, fireworks, etc. out of whatever we found, and did tons of stupid other stuff. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland that you see in movies in a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher. With this, parents often just let their kids mess around in these places, so we would be doing stupid stuff in these abandoned buildings. Well, one day we were messing around when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby. We didn't really care. We were used to seeing weird stuff. But after a bit, we noticed the person was not really moving. They just stood there. When he noticed we had seen him, the man slowly walked into view. A large, bold man. Black coat. A nice one, likely an import, which was expensive at the time. And American sneakers. Also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes, because he just said, "Like my shoes? I have more if you want them. Come on." Now, few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone that you did not want to mess with. The kicker, though, was once he turned around, my friend noticed that he had a gun in his pants. The second he saw that, he just yelled gun and booked it, and we all just scattered. I just heard the guy curse loudly, but did not see him again. Now, if the story ended here, it would have just been a creepy encounter. But sometime later, we were no longer allowed to play in that area. I found out much later that they had found another child beaten to death with a rock in that building shortly after our experience. To be honest, as a kid, I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death. At which point, the dots connected, and I realized what we potentially ran away from. I posted this in a different subreddit, but I can't get it out of my mind. The more I consider it, the more certain I am that someone, most likely my creepy maintenance guy, entered my apartment in a very unconventional way. This happened close to 10 years ago. Daylight savings time reminded me of a very strange incident. My husband, baby daughter, and I lived together in a small apartment. We had a clock on the wall in our living room that we never adjusted for daylight savings time. It had been an hour off for months. It was out of reach and we were really busy. Rather than changing it, we just joked about it all the time. We rarely relied on the analog clock anyway. Plus, eventually it would be correct again. One day I got home from a morning outing with my daughter, and I noticed that a banana peel was in the hall on the floor. It had been stepped on. This was very strange because we did not have any bananas in our house. In fact, we never did. None of us ever ate them. I was quite startled. I sent a text to my husband and asked him if he stopped by home during his shift and possibly dropped the banana peel on the floor. He said he most certainly had not. We checked our camera footage and no one had come into our apartment. I cleaned the banana up off the carpet. I packed a diaper bag up for my daughter so we could leave for the afternoon. Before we walked out the door, I glanced at our clock. The time was correct. It had been adjusted for the time change. I was startled. I checked my phone to be certain. Sure enough, the clock had been adjusted. I grabbed my daughter and our bag and we left. Once we got safely to the car, I messaged my husband to ask if he had adjusted the clock. He had not. When we got home that evening, my husband thought I had been joking with him. I still can't explain what happened. My husband is not a practical joker, and this would be a very weird practical joke to play. We felt pretty certain that no one had entered our front door. We had a camera. They weren't as good as the ones they make these days, but it worked. The only other way someone could have come into our apartment is through our attic, which is connected to the apartment next door. There were little attic doors in the largest bedroom ceilings. I used to tell myself this was some sort of otherworldly or paranormal activity, but the less naive I get, the more I believe our maintenance guy must have entered our apartment through the attic. I assume it must have been the maintenance guy because he had access to keys, ladders, and such things. He also gave me very bad vibes. He always made me feel very uneasy. His stares lingered, and he was always hanging around making uncomfortable conversations. The thing that makes me the most uncomfortable is that whomever it was left obvious clues that he had been there. If he had tried to be stealthy, he surely wouldn't have smashed a banana into the carpet and changed the clock. I wonder what he was doing in our apartment. Just hanging around? How often did he do this? Why was he comfortable enough to leave obvious clues that he had been there? He was fired after just a few months on the job. I was relieved at the time. Looking back, thinking about things now, I'm more than relieved. I'll be very happy if that maintenance guy and I never meet again. A few years ago, I, a 35-year-old male, had a terrifying experience that still haunts me today. I was living in a busy city at the time, and I had just finished a late shift at work. It was around 10 p.m., and I was walking home through the quieter side of the streets of my neighborhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, so I was alert, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 feet behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed like just another person walking the same route. But something about his movements caught my attention. He wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine, no matter how fast or slow I went. After a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated, hoping he wouldn't follow. I checked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. It's hard to describe, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts told me that something wasn't right. I crossed the street, hoping that would throw him off, but he crossed too without hesitation. I thought, okay, this is weird now. I had to make a decision. I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable. I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store to try to lose him. The store was empty save for the cashier who barely looked up from their phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if the guy would pass by. He didn't. He stopped right outside the store. At this point, I could clearly see his face through the glass. He was staring directly at me. I panicked and ran back into the aisles trying to calm down. I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay here any longer. I tried to pay, but I was so rattled that I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing I had to. I didn't see him for a while, and my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block. It was like he had been waiting there the whole time. I wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just followed me for a while. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, not daring to look back until I was inside. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that night, but the whole experience left me unsettled for weeks. I never felt comfortable walking home alone at night, late after that, even though I've lived in the city my entire life. I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way that he followed me. It felt intentional, and it left me with a gut feeling that I couldn't shake. If you're reading this, the guy who followed me for hours that night, let's not meet again. This is a long story, so stick with me. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I'm a bartender. I have some crazy stories where I've been genuinely scared for my life, but this has got to be the worst. I'm working a double at the restaurant. Around 11 a.m., a delivery man comes in with a package that I had to sign for. He comes, I sign for the package and tell him to have a good day with a smile. I continue my shift per usual. This was Friday or Saturday, I can't remember specifically, but later on we got busy. The restaurant and parking lot full. I see a lot of different people daily, plus seeing someone for the second time ever out of their uniform. You may not recognize them, but the FedEx driver comes and sits at the bar. I don't obviously remember him from the 25-second interaction that we had that morning. I start talking to him as I do all my customers. I get him a drink, appetizer, another drink, entree, etc. Our conversation started. Him. How long have you worked here? Me. A few years. I've worked my way up. Him. How do you like it here? Just regular conversation with a bar guest. It slowly became not so regular. He asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said yes. He would change the subject and then go back, complimenting me, saying how beautiful I was every few minutes. Can I have your number? No, I don't think my boyfriend would appreciate that. Okay, what's your last name? We could just be Facebook friends. All annoying but normal interactions I've had with men in this industry. He started to become really pushy over time, pressing for my phone number or social media. I continued to politely decline and laugh it off. He then tells me, I actually came this morning to drop off a package with FedEx. You signed for it. I came back just for you. I smile and continue with my stupid customer service. Oh yeah, I remember you. Smile and laugh it off. I even stepped in the back to vent my anger to my management at this point, about how he was being extra pushy and uncomfortable. Flash forward about an hour. He pays his tab and leaves. I'm just glad he's gone at this point. We'll say as a guess it's about 7 p.m. when he leaves. We are still busy and we close at 10. We finish dinner service. Customers slowly start to leave and the restaurant is finally empty. I've been cleaning for a while and I'm finally washing up. It's about 10:30 at this point. I'm cleaning the bar. I look up. The whole front of the restaurant that I'm facing consists of large windows that face the parking lot, and I see one car in the parking lot. I notice that the delivery driver / guest from earlier is standing outside the car, walking around it and seeming like he's cleaning the back seat out. Doors open and he's leaning in and out with a bag. As soon as I realized it was him who had left almost 4 hours ago, my heart sank. Why was he still there? Why was he cleaning the back seat out? I freak. My manager and I are the only people left in the restaurant at this point. It's almost 11. I run to her and tell her everything, and how he came back just for me, and about how he would seemingly left 4 hours ago. And I made her come back from the back of the restaurant to behind the bar up front so she could see him in the parking lot, waiting for me. She says she's going to call the police, and at this point my boyfriend and I had an apartment literally 5 minutes away from the restaurant. I told her not to worry about it. I'll just call my boyfriend to come get me. I did just that, but my boyfriend could immediately tell that something was wrong. And when I'm scared / anxious, I ramble. So I gave him a quick debriefing of what was going on. He said he would be there soon and I hung up. My manager made me sit in the office until he got there, so I didn't see this go down. All I remember is my boyfriend coming into the restaurant to get me, walking me to the car through the back door, and me getting home. My boyfriend, who is very confrontational and protective, later tells me that he pulled into the parking lot to see the FedEx driver sitting in the driver's seat of his car. My boyfriend walked up to his car and knocked on the window for him to roll it down. He does, and my boyfriend tells him something along the lines of, "You need to get out of here." This is where the scariest thing happens. The dude responded to him in a different language, mumbling and acting like he didn't speak English. My boyfriend said something like, "I know you speak English. You've been talking to my girlfriend all night, and you need to get out of here." Dude continued to ramble in a different language until my boyfriend raised his voice and basically said, "You have 15 seconds before I pull you out of this car, and you never leave this parking lot." For the guy to finally pull the car and drive and speed off. I was on edge for weeks after this interaction, and even considered switching jobs. Why was he still in the parking lot that long after close, and hours after cashing out his tab? And why was he cleaning his back seat? To the creepy bar guest / delivery driver, let's never meet again. Alright, so picture this. It was a Friday night, and my friend Sarah and I decided to check out this old abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. Back when we were kids, we used to hang out there, which made us think it would be a fun trip down memory lane. We returned home after spending the evening reminiscing and goofing around. The darkness outside was creeping me out as the sun had set. And then, out of nowhere, we saw this guy crouching by the road, staring at us as we drove past. It freaked us out big time. We continued driving, but when we glanced back, the man was gone. The tension in the car was so strong you could cut it with a knife. We were on edge, to put it mildly. At around 1 a.m., the wind was howling like crazy outside. Sarah and I were feeling hungry, so we made the decision to get a late-night snack. We headed to the car, which was parked near the woods. Not the most comfortable spot, let me tell you. As we approached the car, I swear I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the trees. Sarah freaked out and I screamed, causing us to both back away in panic. To make things even scarier, a peculiar car was parked near us, its headlights glaring at us like something out of a horror film. Even after calling my mom for reassurance, fear persisted. We sat in the car, observing as the mysterious vehicle recurred, sending chills down our spines. We were locked in that car for what felt like forever, and the tension increased every time the strange vehicle came back. When it finally disappeared, we took the initiative to investigate, driving around to see the license plate. After a night of fear and uncertainty, we decided to call it a night and go home. We were shaken by the events of that night, a reminder that darkness can be more than just the shadows. Several years ago, I got my first healthcare job as a psychiatric technician at this outpatient clinic. Psych techs have many different tasks. In that office, my role was like a medical assistant. I was excited to start my career in healthcare. I felt like I was contributing to something really meaningful. The team was all warm and welcoming. All the staff were really polite to each other and to patients. There was this one assistant, though, let's call him Tom, who was a little eccentric, but he was mostly polite. Nothing about him screamed danger or anything, but it just felt awkward with him. He had this habit of standing way too close when we talked. His gaze when we talked to you was seriously intense. It was like he was trying to read my mind or something. At one staff meeting, his stare was so distracting that I lost my train of thought. Our break room had this huge screen showing live footage from the security cameras around the clinic. We didn't record anyone's appointments, but we recorded everything else, like the waiting room, the little conference room, etc. One day, I saw Tom just hanging out in front of the screen, completely fixated on a patient in the waiting room. He wasn't just glancing, he was standing there paying really close attention. That patient was literally just sitting and waiting for his appointment. I asked if something was up with the patient, and Tom said something like, "No, I just find it interesting how to observe how they act when they think that no one is watching." That was a really weird thing to say. The longer I worked there, the more I noticed some concerning behaviors. He would linger around patient files way too long. Most healthcare providers had switched to electronic patient records. For some reason, that clinic did not switch. All of our records were still paper, and we kept them in a file room. Once, I caught him deep into the file of a patient who didn't even come to our clinic anymore. When I asked what he was working on, he just said, "Oh, just catching up on some old cases." One of our patients was a young, sweet woman, whom I will call Rachel. Rachel confided in me that she felt like someone was watching her all the time. It's super important to take those feelings seriously in our line of work and dig deeper instead of just brushing them off. Rachel mentioned that she thought that someone from the clinic might be keeping an eye on her outside of work. My heart sank when she said, "I think it's Tom." To be honest, if she had said anyone else's name, I might not have reacted differently. But when she said it was Tom, I instantly believed her. She hadn't seen anything super obvious, like a parked car outside or anything like that. But she had noticed Tom hanging around her apartment outside the complex sometimes. Like I said, hearing her say that she thought it was Tom made me trust her instincts. A few nights and days, I decided to test the water and casually asked him, "Hey Tom, "What do you know about that patient Rachel?" His answer was uncomfortably detailed. He told me all this irrelevant information about Rachel's personal life, which had nothing to do with her treatment plan. Then he mentioned how Rachel had canceled her last appointment, not because she was busy, but because she went out for lunch with friends instead. He saw it on Instagram and calculated what time it must have been. He talked about it so casually that it felt like monitoring her personal life was just a normal part of the job. I didn't know what to say. His idea of professional boundaries was so different from mine that if I told him he was being inappropriate, I didn't think he would agree. The next day, I brought this up with another one of my coworkers, whom I'll call Sarah. Sarah said something like, "Yeah, I've heard the rumors. Some patients have mentioned seeing him outside the clinic." It felt like everyone had sensed something was off about Tom, but no one had taken any real action yet. Then, one chaotic day while trying to catch up on documentation, I asked Tom if he had a spare notebook. He handed me one. I don't know if it was a notebook that Tom meant to keep to himself, but it wasn't empty at all. It was filled with detailed notes about patients, what they wore, their addresses, their departure times from the clinic. Way too much information. And there was even a section dedicated to Rachel with all these little details about her coffee preferences and jogging schedule. I immediately reported that notebook to our supervisor, who promised to look into it. But nothing happened after that. I ended up quitting and finding a different job. I could not stay in an environment that allowed his behavior. At the time of writing this, the story that happened to me was 5 days ago. It was on a Saturday, and for context, I'm a 16-year-old French boy. So I was with my friend this Saturday in my little French hometown, casually hanging out at the border of the town for a whole hour. My friend here is a 17-year-old girl. We were sitting on big rocks behind the kindergarten school of our town, right in front of the beet field at around 8 p.m. The sky was starting to turn dark. Nothing has ever really happened in our town since we live in it, except recently, when a dad stabbed his daughter and wife 40 times. But it has nothing to do with my story. Note that there aren't many foreigners there since it's kind of a lost country town close to Paris. So I was sitting with my friend eating stuff like we casually do when we hang out, when suddenly, I spot a man with a beanie. He had his hands in his sweatshirt and was directly walking towards us. He was way too close for my friend and me to get up and walk away. He comes right in front of us and starts talking English. My friend doesn't speak English, so she didn't really know what was happening at this time. So this guy comes right in front of me when he noticed that I was able to speak English and tries to shake my hand, which I deny the approach. Note that he didn't look like he was drunk or under drugs. The weird guy starts talking to me, and he points out the field that was behind my back, which means that if I wanted to look at it, I would have needed to turn back to him. And then he says very insistently, "Is that cabbage?" I responded yes, but he wasn't satisfied by my response, since he was trying to get me to look behind me. However, there was literally the other part of the field that was in my line of sight at my left. He tried to get me to look again and again, which was kind of stressing because this guy was at like less than a meter away from me, which means that he could have done anything that he wanted to me. Then he told me some incoherent stuff like my driver told me there was cabbage, or I asked people they didn't understand. Right after saying that, he pats my shoulder, goes behind me and crouches at the border of the field. He tells me to come see if it was cabbage, when I clearly told him many times that it was cabbage, even though it was not. I was just trying to get rid of this creep, but it kind of looked like cabbage. Right when I see that I'm out of his range, I say to my friend to take her bag and start running. At first, she thought I was joking, but when she saw me running, she changed her mind. We were like 20 meters away from him, and he started walking towards us but rapidly disappeared behind the kindergarten school. My friend and I were both really unsettled and quickly wanted to go home. We said goodbye to each other, and we split in two different directions. I needed to go by the elementary school that was right next to the kindergarten school to get home. Suddenly, I see this creep coming from the road that was between the field and the kindergarten school, with his phone on and in his hands. I quickly turned around and went at my friend's house with her, waiting for his father to drive me home. Later that night, my friend and I were talking, and we suggested that it may be someone kidnapping or organ trafficking stuff, since it was the first time we saw an alone foreigner that didn't speak a single word in French. The fact that he got up and escaped quickly when we started running hinted me on the fact that it was just some pretext to get me to move away from my friend. Maybe he had texted some guy waiting in a car for them to kidnap me or my friend, since the creep was clearly trying to make us lose time with the cabbage thing. Later that night, I told what happened to a friend that lives in the same town as us, and he told us that this guy was hanging around the town with a weird behavior that day as well. We were really unsettled and scared after that event, but now we're completely good, and I'm wondering if we're doing too much about this guy even though my intuition really told me to get away from him. If anyone has anything to say to help us clear this up, or if anyone knows any known cases, or maybe this has happened to someone else, please let me know. But to the creep that made me feel like I was being trapped in a horror movie, let's not meet again. Last year, I started law school in Los Angeles. I have never lived in a big city before, and I was really excited to be in a massive city with over 4 million people. Ever since I was little, I always knew I had a half-sister in LA, but my parents had this weird anger towards her that always made it feel like a taboo topic. Of course, I had looked her up on social media, and I knew what she looked like, but that was about it. We had never actually met. She was never that active on social media, so there wasn't a lot that I could see. Out of nowhere, one day in my first year of law school, I got a friend request on Facebook from my sister. Her profile seemed legitimate. She had Facebook friends, and her profile picture looked like her. She sent me a message, inviting me to a little dinner party at the park with her friends. We could finally meet each other for the first time. I was new to LA, still am, and I had no idea which parts of the city to avoid at night. I was so excited about the idea, but I had a lot of anxiety about it too. It would be nice if we met, totally clicked, and became besties for life. But what if we ended up sobbing like we were in some dramatic movie scene? What if I tried to talk to her and she just didn't click with me, and she started showing me an attitude? Or worse, what if it's all going well until we have some kind of disagreement? Someone said something hurtful, and then we were both crying in front of everyone. Honestly, if she had suggested a cozy little bakery for desserts instead, I would have gone. But going to a park with other people didn't feel right. I thought it was like such a precious moment that I didn't want to have it in front of all of these other people. I couldn't bring myself to go. I didn't want to risk having a meltdown in front of other people. I was worried about how messy it could get. A few weeks later, I Googled that park to see what it was like. Maybe we could meet up there together, just one-on-one. That's when I learned that something was wrong. I won't say the name of the park, but anyone who has lived in LA for long will tell you that it's not a safe place for girls to be having a dinner party at night. The area surrounding that park has very high violent crime rates. It's controlled by gangs. Even people who do illegal business in that park are forced to pay a tax to the gang in exchange for being left alone. So now, I was really concerned and curious. I actually tried to get a hold of my sister myself. She was an undergrad at the time, at a local college. I had a friend who went to her school. I asked my friend to reach out to her on campus and ask her if she'd be okay with meeting us. They connected, and the three of us met at my friend's house. It was great. We got along so well. My friend was also very happy to do that for us. The three of us had so much fun. We weren't bursting in tears, but we let out a few. We had dinner. We watched a movie and we spent the night at my friend's house. When I told my sister about that whole thing, She said that she hadn't used Facebook since high school, so clearly someone was impersonating her. I would have told her to report the fake account, but it had already been deleted. She knew that she had been impersonated on social media, though. Another one of her friends had been scammed by someone pretending to be her. It was some scheme involving fake concert tickets or something like that. Someone had been impersonating my sister. They knew that I was in town, and they literally tried to lure me into one of the most dangerous parts of LA at night. I have no idea what their motives were. I don't know if I even want to find out. Meeting my sister after all of these years was a beautiful thing, but the whole backdrop was terrifying. This happened 4 years back. It was the middle of winter, and the night was unseasonably warm, without a hint snow on the ground. I left my apartment around 8 p.m. to go for my daily walk. I worked nights and my schedule was screwed up, hence the 8 p.m. walk, figuring I would cross the bridge into the city nearby. For further context, I'm a tall guy who's fairly athletic, and I was in my late 20s at the time. I'd rarely had a problem walking at night, and at the time, I felt safe to do so. I put on my headphones and headed towards the bridge. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. I passed by old houses, a subpar Mexican restaurant, a really good Mexican restaurant, a sketchy gas station, some newly built upscale apartments, and finally, I was at the river, enjoying the view of the bright lights over the dark flowing water, not yet frozen. I crossed the bridge into the city and hit a crosswalk button at a four-way intersection, then noticed someone standing on the corner opposite, the only other soul I'd seen outside that night. Seemingly, she was doing nothing, and I assumed she was waiting for an Uber to come pick her up, since she didn't seem to be waiting for the light to change. The street, ordinarily busy during the daytime, was silent. The light changed, and I crossed, headed in her direction. As I neared her, I noticed that she would cast glances in my direction, then look away, almost sheepishly. She did this multiple times, and I figured she was unnerved by me. I sympathized, figuring it must have made her uneasy, us being the only two people on a dimly lit street. As I passed by, I took in her outfit, mostly because I thought she looked cold. She wore a knitted hat with tassels, a sweater that looked too thin for the winter, tight jeans, and a little plastic children's backpack on her back. I thought she was in her teens at first, but upon closer inspection, she appeared to be in her late 20s or 30s. She had short, cropped light brown hair and a pale complexion. She was skinny and was of average height. I was maybe a head taller than her. I walked by and continued down the street. I passed by high-rise hotels on my right and left, and made my way into a central park. During peak hours, this place would be packed with tourists and locals alike. But that day, at an odd hour, and with the pandemic in full swing, I felt like the only man in the city. I admired the brilliant display of lighted trees as I crossed through the center of the park. Then, figuring I was at a good halfway point in my journey, I made my way around an old marble and stone library, back towards the bridge. As I turned the corner of the library back onto the street from which I'd come, I nearly collided with someone, moving towards me. It was the same woman I'd seen not 10 minutes earlier. My noise-canceling headphones were still on, so I pulled down one side and said something by way of apology. She said nothing in return. Instead, she stepped back from me and stood below a streetlight, not making eye contact. She stole tiny glances at me, that same tick I'd noticed before. I put my headphones back on, nodded a good night, and headed towards the nearest crosswalk. Reason told me that she must be headed in the direction I'd come from, since we'd nearly run into each other headed opposite ways. But some part of me whispered that she wasn't headed that way. Sure enough, when I turned to look, she was trailing close behind me, her strides surprisingly long and energetic. I found this odd enough that I continued to watch her out of the corner of my eye. Shortly after I reached the crosswalk, as I stood there waiting for the light to change, she caught up with me, passed me by, and stopped. A car went past, and as it did so, she squatted over her plastic bag a few meters from me, rifling frantically for something, looking up at me on occasion. I hit a button on my headphones, stopping my podcast so that I could hear her better. What I found disturbing about the motion of her looking through her bag is that it struck me as fake, as though she were pretending for some reason. She was barely looking inside, and her careless motions struck more like bad acting. Something about her motions, the way she kept looking at me, felt wrong. The light changed, and I began to walk quickly, but she was faster. She stood suddenly, darting past me towards the museum, swinging the half-open little pink backpack over her shoulder. I watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness beyond the reach of the streetlights. I hoped that that was the end of that, and after a few beats of not seeing her, I let my guard fall a little, restarting my podcast. Beyond the museum was a patch of poorly lit sidewalk, in front of a squat building with mirror-like windows. I wasn't far from the bridge now. As I made my way back there, I turned my head to look at the reflections of buildings and streetlights in the windows. To my horror, a dark figure sprinted silently towards my reflection, dreamlike. I'm not sure why, maybe out of sheer confusion, but I turned to meet her as she hurtled towards me. Perhaps surprised by my sudden turn, she halted mere feet from me, staring. Her eyes were wide and looked frantic, wild. She kept looking at my arms, then back at my face as though sizing me up. My accidental bluff had worked, and in the darkness, I suppose I must have looked more prepared to fight back than I felt. She gripped something small tightly in one hand, though she held it off to the side, and in the shadow of the building I couldn't see what it was. Seconds dragged as we stood there, staring at one another. Immobilized by fear and confusion, I waited for her to make some move, to attempt to use whatever object she held in her hand. Just then, to my enormous relief, a car trundled slowly past. A bit of my strength returned, and over my blaring podcast I felt more than heard myself shouting at her, "What do you want?" No reply. I slowly backed away from her, expecting her to move. She just watched me, that same intense look on her face. I took another step back, then another, steadily backing away from her until I felt confident enough to turn and carefully walk away. As I reached a better lit area, I began to move faster, all the while keeping my eyes trained on her shadowy form. She stood there for some time, statuesque. Then abruptly, having spontaneously abandoned whatever plans she may have had for me, she turned from me, and without looking for traffic, she crossed the street with long strides and disappeared around the corner of a building. Something about the casual air of it disturbed me. I kept my eyes trained behind me on my walk home, afraid that she would follow me. The bridge was well lit, and I saw no sign of her. Knowing that this was the only way for her to follow me and keep up on foot, I breathed a sigh of relief. I saw no more cars headed from the city, no more pedestrians out walking. Nothing happened after that. I'm not sure why, but I didn't call the cops that night. I still regret having not called, despite my roommates insisting I do so. I just remembering thinking that I wasn't sure what to say to the cops, that I hadn't really been attacked, that they wouldn't be able to find her anyway. I made up excuses. I suppose I must have been in shock, in denial at having been nearly ambushed, especially by someone smaller than me, in my own city, so close to my apartment. One of my roommates called the cops for me. A cop drove through the area, but by that point she was gone. Woman with the little pink backpack. Let's not meet again. This happened a few hours ago, and I'm not scared anymore, just angry that my pizza got stolen. In my town, there's a story that a guy has moved into the deep woods close to our town. I never believed it, as I go for night drives occasionally and never saw him or anything resembling a man that lives in the woods. Anyway, tonight, I decided to go for a drive and drove past a pizza place. Being hungry, I decided to get a pizza before I went home. In my head, I had a plan to eat the pizza and play some Minecraft, as I'm in my 2-week Minecraft phase at the moment. I paid for my pizza and started walking to my car with the pizza in one hand and my phone in the other, messaging my friend, asking if he wants to play some Minecraft when I get home. I look up from my phone to cross the road to the car park, and I see something under my car. It looks like a shadow or something dark. I put my phone in my pocket and pull out the keys. I unlock my car to scare off anything close to the car. I was thinking it may be a cat or a dog just hanging around my car. But when I unlock the car, nothing happens. No cat running away, and nobody running away. The shadow looked like it was cast from the driver's side, so I was gonna have a look to see what it was, and whether I wanted or not to get in. I put my keys away and pull out my phone again, and turn the flashlight on to see better in the dark. As I turn towards the driver's side of my car, I see him. A dirty naked guy with big eyes staring right at me. He was crouched down, trying to hide from me. Now, I usually don't get scared of anything, but this guy scared me. He looked like he rolled around in mud, and it dried out on his skin. His eyes looked creepy, bloodshot, and kind of bulging out of his head, and he was naked. I get startled and jump backwards out of instinct, dropping my pizza in the process. It falls out of his box and onto the floor. I start moving back slowly and shout at him to get away from my car. He looks up at me, then at the pizza, then back at me again. He tilts his head to one side and then jumps towards the pizza like a dog, grabs it and starts running away down the road, and I assume he ran all the way to the woods. I wouldn't know where he went as I didn't feel like following him. I lock my car and run back to the pizza place and stay there for a bit. The workers obviously don't believe me when I tell them what happened, but I know what I saw. Once the fear subsides after a while, I realize that this guy just stole my pizza. Angry as I was looking forward to it, I decide to get another one and run to my car this time. I get in, put the pizza on the passenger seat and go home. Once I got home, I locked all my doors and windows. I even locked my bedroom door as I feel a little bit scared still. I think I'll be playing Minecraft until the sun comes up. Creepy, dirty guy that lives in the woods close to my town, I never want to see you again, because I may have to fight you for stealing my pizza. I posted here before about one of my creepy encounters with men and got some good feedback, so I thought I'd share another experience after it came up in conversation today. This experience occurred several months after the other, and it was the remaining paranoia from it that helped me realize what was happening, and very well may have saved my life. I was 18 at the time, although commonly mistaken for being in my early teens, and had just finished some errands in town and decided to take a shortcut to catch the bus home, said shortcut being a narrow street one of the shopping center's entrances opened onto. It was honestly more of a glorified alleyway, but since the street connected onto the high street and it was the quickest way into the shopping center, it usually got a decent amount of foot traffic and was extremely safe to use. However, depending on the time of day, there may only be very few, if any, people there. And that was the case on this day. Just as I was walking out of the entrance and celebrating the fact that it wasn't blocked by people standing around talking as usual, a young man around my age startled me by stepping out of a small alcove beside the door and blocking my path with an, "Oh, hi there. How are you? Have you been shopping?" The way he had approached me immediately put me off, but the overly familiar fancy seeing you here sort of tone he was using made me hesitate for a moment, wondering if he was just someone from high school who recognized me and wanted to say hello. So I muttered, yeah, hi, to stall for a moment while I racked my brain for who he could be. It didn't take me long to confirm I didn't know a good-looking, fit, blonde 20-something with bright blue eyes and a heavy accent. And since I couldn't think of a good reason someone like that would approach me, My socially awkward, non-confrontational past self decided the best way to deal with the situation was just to dodge around him and leave. He didn't let me though. Instead of taking the hint, he immediately started walking in stride with me on the side of the street closest to the road, so that I was between him and the side of the building. And when I tried to speed up because I didn't like the feeling of being penned in, he sped up along with me, keeping me between him and the wall. As off-putting as that already was, he began asking me questions that seemed innocent enough, but all centered around where I was headed, and if anyone was going to be waiting for me there. Where are you going now? Have you not finished your shopping? Are you meeting your friends? Maybe I could come with you. Or are you meeting your family instead? Do you have a boyfriend? Is he who you're meeting? Are you going home? Do you live near here, or are you getting a bus? I had already asked him to leave me alone once, and he acted like I hadn't even said anything. So I was ignoring his questions and glancing around, desperately hoping someone else would enter the street with us in case he didn't react well to being asked a second time. And that is why I noticed the second man. He was older, in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair, a short but scruffy beard, and had the kind of face and expression that tells you that you might need to be cautious when dealing with this person. I have no idea where he had come from. My guess is he was hiding in the alcove on the other side of the door from the blonde, or further down that side of the street out of sight. But he was now walking in line with us on the opposite side of the road, staring the entire time. I tried not to let either of the men realize I had seen him while my brain went into overdrive, trying to figure out what their endgame was. Were they going to assault me? Surely they wouldn't risk being caught doing that in broad daylight, right outside a shopping center. Maybe they were just going to rob me. But if they wanted to do that, the blonde could have just grabbed my bag and ran when he had the element of surprise, back when he was hiding behind the door. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. At the end of the street was an underground parking garage, the entrance of which opened up onto the pavement. Me and the blonde were walking on, and I would have to walk right past it because of the way he was penning me in towards the wall. It would take him barely any effort to shove me through it, and the dark-haired man across the street had been toying with something in his pocket that I worried at first was a weapon. But what if it was car keys? What if they were planning to drag me in there and into a car, take me who knows where, and do who knows what to me? We were very close to the end of the street now, so I abruptly dropped back behind the blonde and darted towards the road, wanting to get away from the garage and make a beeline for the end of the street without getting within arm's reach of the dark-haired man. The blonde immediately darted after me and blocked my path, hurting me back towards the pavement and pinning me in so close to the wall this time that my arm was almost scraping across it as I walked, all while still talking to me casually, as if he wasn't doing anything wrong. They obviously knew the game was up at this point though, and when I glanced over at the dark-haired man to check where he was, he locked eyes with me, laughed, and called out to the blonde in a different language. The best I was able to determine later was it was Eastern European, but not Lithuanian, Polish, Romanian, or Russian, saying something that made him laugh too, and doubled down on his "is anyone going to miss you" questions, while also asking me if I had ever had a boyfriend, if I had ever kissed a boy, would I like him to be my boyfriend, etc. Obviously, I continued to ignore them and was panicking more and more as we approached the garage. But fortunately for me, the dark-haired man started to lose his patience with the blonde's lack of progress with me and began snapping at him, presumably demanding he get me to answer because the blonde looked worried and his tone was getting more urgent every time the man spoke to him. Only a few feet from the garage, the dark-haired man apparently crossed a line because the blonde suddenly looked furious, stopped walking, span around, and started shouting back at him. I immediately took the opportunity to bolt for the end of the street, and although I heard the blonde shout, "Hey, where are you going?" and what I assume was both of them running behind me, I managed to round the corner and lost them by ducking down the next street, and then several more just to be safe. I didn't feel safe enough to go to my original bus stop in case they stayed in the area and saw me, so I headed for one several blocks away instead, on edge, and jumping at the slightest thing
until I was on the bus and headed home. Although I tried to report the incident to the police, they weren't particularly interested, since neither of the men had actually put their hands on me, and I had no proof of what I assumed they were planning to do to me. I never heard about any abductions, assaults, or robberies in that area, so I'm hoping they simply gave up after the plan didn't work with me. I'm glad I was paranoid enough to save myself from that situation, but do worry sometimes that another girl wasn't as lucky. Nine years ago, I had met a person that to this day, I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school I got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was also lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents, that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms, and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling up in excitement. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comments section. We ended up replying so much, we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks we had stored in the back of the class, and saw that she actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not as sure it was actually her name. In the message I got, Haley told me she was 2 years older than me, and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not caring about anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in our direct messages, until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site, and in our first conversation, we at first talked on messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she told me it was only to better hold a conversation with me, and eventually after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she then suggested we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure she was actually my age, but also to put a name to a face. Haley turned on her camera and she did look in the same age range as me. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus that she easily smiled and spoke so friendly to me, made me feel that I had nothing to be afraid of. So that led to me quickly believe that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going all right. We told each other about our schools, what we liked, and gushing over our favorite series we liked. We talked almost every day, and stayed up late talking nearly all night. We even exchanged a couple of silly pictures of ourselves, and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for 6 months, Haley asked me if I would like to meet her friends. At first I was ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invites me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice, and that Haley reassured me I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so I ignored it. Most of them were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were 18 or 19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me they all met either on another social media site or from real life, but wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. From constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls I were on with them were pure chaos. The messages were even worse, because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that should not be brought up with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was annoying whenever I tried to talk in a conversation. Needless to say, I did not like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, dirty words, and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley, because she never acted like this with me when it was just the two of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly she was talking to her other friends more than she was with me. At first I thought it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she went ballistic on me, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen and then hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me it was fine. She just needed some time alone and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not what I thought she would. Haley began to tell me she had depression, and that was the reason she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it, and said whatever she needed to talk about, she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about how crappy her home life was, and how bad her relationship was with her mom, and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she'd begin complaining about anything happening during her day. If not that, it would be about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked and wanted to end things. The last one freaked me out the most. I was worried about her because we lived in different states, and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation. For so long, my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she dropped that conversation, and we talked like we were before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours at a time, and her texts would come in until 3 or 4 in the morning. The thing was, it was mainly her talking now. Every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I can read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation, when not long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks, or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week or spends the entire weekend texting me nonstop. The topics of her self-worth have also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye or, "I can't live like this anymore," without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me pictures of her, marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and every time I would panic and message her after, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, the group chat with her other friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently. Drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked and unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in messages. and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like crap all the time, so I messaged the group chat that I had enough of them and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone I talked to, deleted my messaging account, and deleted the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. I later found out that all of the pictures Haley had sent me were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things didn't add up. I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me, meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the picture of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. For almost 3 months, I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have many better friends now, and I am absolutely certain I will never have to hear from Haley again. But sometimes, I still wonder who that woman really was, and what was it about me that she was interested in. Hopefully I won't ever find out. So to Haley, if you somehow ever find this story, let's not meet again. Edit. For clarification, and the fact I got tired of explaining it in the comment section, the pictures she would send me when we would message each other were all pictures of her friends and family, places she claimed to have been to, and items she owned. A few weeks after I blocked Haley, I found them stored on my computer. I got curious, so I reversed image searched the pictures she sent me, and they were all stock photos. Every result I found from her picture led back to a stock photo site, with the only difference between them being that she cropped out the logo of the site from the pictures. Basically, I was lied to. A lot.
I matched with a man on Tinder one day. The conversation got spicy and I gave him my number so that we can continue chatting. We texted that night. We never exchanged photos or anything like that. Never made plans to meet up. The conversation died and I forgot about him. Weeks go by and I deleted the conversation. Then late one night I get a lewd photo of a man that I don't recognize. I think of insulting them but decide to just delete it and not respond. A few weeks later I get another one. I have the idea to check my deleted messages to make sure that I don't know them. Sure enough, I find out that it's the Tinder guy. It's really weird of him to text me a month later just lewd images after no contact or anything for over a month. Ew. So I blocked him. A couple weeks later, I get a lewd video on my Apple Watch. It's the same guy. I'm not sure how I got the message on my watch if I already blocked his number. I block him again on my watch. What a weirdo, I think. A week later, I leave my apartment to go on a walk. I see him. He is right there in front of my apartment, walking towards me. He has the same outfit as his profile photos and same tattoos and hat, so I'm certain that it was him. I never mentioned where I live. I'm freaked out, but I'm dressed in baggy clothes and recently changed up my hair color so I can keep my head down in hopes that he doesn't recognize me. I walk right past him. I was too scared to look at him to see his reaction if he recognized me. I was too scared to look back in his direction to see where he went, so I just kept walking forward. I was severely freaked out, but nothing else happened after that and I never saw him again. I never mentioned where I lived, so my only thought is that he must have used my phone number to look me up. It was the least likely person I would have expected. Just some random person I messaged for only one day on Tinder. Even with the lewd content they sent, I still just thought that they were a regular perv. I never expected them to somehow show up at my apartment. They didn't even text a word to me or attempt to meet up. They just sent lewds over 2 months and then appeared. It's just so random and weird. I think their motive was definitely something sexually perverted. It gives me creeps to think about what they wanted, but I'm glad they left me alone. I never give out my real phone number to dates anymore. It's my day off, and my husband is traveling for work. I had just come upstairs after a run on our treadmill, which we keep on the ground floor where the garage is. I came upstairs and was about to hop in the shower, but on my way up I saw these 2 plastic skeletons that I'd bought for Halloween. The plan was to bring them up on the awning so it looked like they were sitting on our front balcony. It's a bit dirty, but I decided to set them up before I got in the shower. So I was outside in my sports bra and leggings only. I had to bring a chair from the dining room outside so I could reach the top of the awning. There are hooks for hanging plants up there, so I was using said hooks to hang the skeletons. The door to my house was ajar while doing this. I was done hanging them and adjusting their poses when a woman came running up the stairs to our front door. To be honest, I was so startled that there was a random woman on my porch that when she said, "I'm dying of thirst. I'm so thirsty, can I have some water?" I just went inside and grabbed a water bottle. We recently had a box of bottled waters delivered, so they were just inside the foyer. This woman followed me inside and I started to panic as I realized that I was now inside my house with a strange woman. There's a lot of homeless people and junkies in the neighborhood, but she was well dressed. Besides that, she was wearing a wool peacoat in 80-degree weather, which is odd, and clean. I'm a small person, and she was probably a head taller than me and outweighed me by 30+ pounds. She chugged the water bottle and started chatting with me as if we were old friends. She asked how long I'd had the house and where my parents were. I'm over 30, so it was a weird question. I told her my parents had never lived here, and then said, "I have to leave soon, so you'd better get going," and literally shoved her out the door. I texted my husband who is overseas and could see on the Ring camera that she left the property. He kept asking why I let her in. Honestly, I'm not sure why I did, but I also really didn't expect her to follow me inside. So, strange woman from the sidewalk who came inside my house, let's not meet again.